线长山又高，处处港口都险要。
Hello and welcome back to Strait Talk with Xiangyu, where we dive deep into the Taiwan Strait, a pivotal frontline of the battleground between Western hegemony and Eastern resistance. Today we have a very special friend on the show whose work is close to another frontline, namely the DMZ in Korea. You've probably seen her content if YouTube or TikTok's algorithm decides you might be interested in catching a glimpse of North Korea. But that's not the main topic of discussion today. She's lived a few years in both mainland China and Taiwan, so today we're going to compare and contrast everyday life on the two sides of the strait. So without further ado, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. So for my viewers who aren't familiar with you or your work yet, could you please introduce yourself and talk about how you ended up in mainland China and eventually to Taiwan and what Korea had to do with all of this?
Gosh, that's a really big kind of way to introduce me because that happened all over about a 6-year span. So I'll try and break it down and keep it as interesting as possible. But I'm Zoe. I'm originally from the UK and I've been living in or around East Asia for the past 6 or 7 years. What originally brought me over to East Asia actually was languages. At university, I studied Japanese and took a year abroad to go and live in Japan. And that's basically what started actually my whole time in Japan and Taiwan, in China and Taiwan and stuff. And Korea, actually. Because when I was living in Japan, it was 2015 or 2016, and it was a time in Europe. I don't know if, it was probably big news in the US as well, but in Europe, they had the migrant crisis, and there was lots of terrorist attacks. The UK was on high alert for terrorism, and I'd just come from the UK. It felt fine. Obviously the government report was that it was terror attack imminent, but it felt fine on the ground, right? So anyway, I went over to Japan, and all of my Japanese friends, they would say to me like, wow, cool, UK, so nice, we really want to visit, but it's too dangerous at the moment. And I was like, what? Like, people were talking about my own country like it was too dangerous to visit, and like it was a war zone. And I found that crazy. And then I realized after it happened a few times, it's basically because how the media were reporting about Europe and the migrant crisis and stuff. And so I basically said to myself, I went home one day and I was like, hey, you know what? If the media can make my country, the UK, seem like a war zone, seem like this terrifying place. I mean, like, Japanese people would not even fly over there, over Europe. Like, if they were going to the US, they would go like around the other way. They didn't even want to fly over. So I wanted to challenge myself. And of course, the country that came to mind when I thought, what country do I only know through the media that I think is terrifying, was North Korea. I decided to go on a trip to North Korea. Like most people, I didn't even know if North Korea tourism was a thing. I typed it into Google. Turns out it's a thing. And then I discovered there that actually there's a lot more to it than what the media would have you believe. And kind of inspired by that and wanting to expand this narrative, I then started working in Korea, which is what brought me to China, because in order to go to North Korea, you have to first go to China. So I moved to China, and then I was working in North Korea tourism for about 3 or 4 years. And then COVID happened. Everyone knows, that was. And kind of turned everyone's life upside down. So that's why Taiwan happened, because I was waiting for basically to be able to go back to China, to be able to start working in North Korea again, because North Korea shut its borders. China also shut its borders, and I happened to be out of China at the time when it shut its borders. So I waited a couple of years, and in the end, I decided to move to Taiwan, where I'm now pursuing my PhD. And I hope that all kind of brings everything together in an interesting way.
When I first started following your content, I think you started posting in around 2019, right?
Yeah, actually, I used to hate Instagram. I hated social media. It was for this same reason of wanting to show people this different side of North Korea that I started social media. So yeah, I think it was around 2019 or something.
Right. Yeah, I would have thought you love social media given how consistently you post.
Honestly, to me, it's like a job that I'm happy to do, but at the same time, I'm happy to distance myself from it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I never guessed. Well, back then, I never guessed you'd end up living in Taiwan, and we'd end up recording podcasts and videos together.
Yeah, I
But
know,
you know
right?
what's funny is, yeah, somehow Korea's had a huge impact on cross-strait relations multiple times, and especially Taiwan, because you know the first Sino-Japanese War was actually fought in Korea. Well, a huge part of it was fought in Korea,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
and yeah, and the you know China's loss in that war forced it to cede Taiwan to Japan, and then the Korean War happened in 1950,
Mm.
and the Korean War basically renewed the U.S.'s reluctant support for Chiang Kai-shek. So they sent the Seventh Fleet to the Taiwan Strait, and Beijing had to divert its PLA forces intended for, you know, finishing the job in Taiwan to Korea. So I'm kind of hinting at what may be discussed in future episodes, by the way. But since the fates of North and South Korea, you know, mainland China and Taiwan are all tied to one another, it kind of makes sense that you would eventually end up here basically by fate. By the way, where in Japan were you living when you were there?
So I was in Kobe, which is kind of most people will know it in the like Kyoto Osaka triangle. Yeah.
So it's not like a small town.
No, it wasn't a small town. Not by any means. But yeah, I have to say, like for me, and we'll probably get onto this topic later as well when I talk more about Taiwan, because I feel like Japan and Taiwan are really closely tied. For me, a lot of people ask why I studied Japanese and, you know, stuff like that, but it wasn't out of any love for Japan that I studied Japanese. It was simply a love for languages, and I wanted to learn a language with a different script. Um, and that was what my university offered. And I have to say, like, I have nothing against Japanese people. I have nothing against Japan, but I just don't like living there. And it doesn't sit well with me. And I know so many people love Japan, and for all the right reasons. It's an amazing country. It's so cool. Um, but I think it's a very different vibe when you kind of live there and you get really deep into Japanese culture. And with some people, it might really sit well with them, but for other people like me, it really doesn't. And I much prefer Chinese culture, which a lot of people don't actually like. You know, and what I mean by this is certain aspects such as being able to talk your mind straight, instead of worrying about like what people think about you, and instead of having to like really beat around the bush in order to get to one point, you can just say what you want. And I feel like the reason why I'm saying this is because I feel like Taiwan, culturally, is much more similar to Japan in that respect. And I don't think I realized that before I moved here, because a lot of the time I find it tricky to be here actually for those reasons. But
I never really realized that until I traveled to the mainland, and not even just anywhere in the mainland, but like the further north you go, the more direct people are when they speak.
oh yeah.
If at first you're used to the way people speak in Taiwan, you might think that they come off as rude,
Yeah.
but it's because they just kind of see you as, you know, they feel comfortable enough around you to just speak their mind.
Yes.
So in a way, it is a form of hospitality and respect, but it takes some getting used to. So, I mean, I know by the time you moved to Japan, or by the time you moved from Japan to China, you had already experienced your move from the UK to Japan. So being thrown into a new environment wasn't anything new to you. But the move from Kobe to Yangshuo, which is where you were initially living on the mainland, must have been a bigger adjustment. For those who don't know, Yangshuo is a small town the population's like 300,000, right?
I have no idea actually, but it's a very small town compared to a lot of Chinese cities.
That must have been a bigger adjustment in some ways, moving from the UK to Japan, or maybe it wasn't. What was that like, and what was your first impression?
Yeah, no, it was for sure a bigger adjustment. I thought China was wild, and it is. China's crazy. But I love it. It's the biggest culture shock I think that I've ever experienced. walking around down the streets, I just remember being mesmerized by everything. And it's funny because at this time, like it seems like it wasn't that long ago, and me recalling this, saying what I'm about to say makes me feel really old. But at that time, I feel like vlogging and stuff like that wasn't such a big thing, but I would, and I don't even think my phone had like a good camera or something. I don't know. But I just remember like walking down the streets, just having a feeling of like wanting to film everything I saw because everything was so interesting and so different. And I didn't speak a word of Chinese. I could read a little bit. I could read about 1,000 characters because I knew Japanese, but that didn't help me when you need to speak to people. And I remember trying to learn, which honestly is like the bane of my life here in Taiwan. It still gets me when people say it, but I remember trying to learn even the numbers in South Taiwan, which, you'll be familiar with this when I say it, but the numbers 10 and 4 sound so similar. And when you haven't, like, they're two different tones, but when you haven't understood the tones in Chinese, when you speak in a really southern accent, shi and like how can I say it so it sounds Taiwanese or South China, like si and si sound really similar, right? So like instead of shi and si, as you would say in like northern China. So yeah, just I remember trying to buy things in a shop and being like, wait, is that 40? Is it 14? Is it 4? Anyway, it was a really big culture shock, but I love it. I love getting out of my comfort zone. And I have to say, like, it's probably the biggest culture shock that I've ever experienced. Luckily, there's a really tight-knit group of expats there. So I mainly kind of hung out with them, to be honest. It was my first introduction to Chinese culture, and it was easy to just hang out with foreigners. So, I totally understand how most foreigners end up doing that. But for me, it was really nice moving to Beijing to be able to kind of integrate my life more in Chinese culture and learn more about the language and stuff. So, yeah, it was a big culture shock, I have to say, but a very beautiful, very cool place. Yangshuo is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. I think about it all the time still. But then I also think about the culture shocks, like walking down the street and walking past a dog meat restaurant. Yeah.
For those who don't know, I think my suggested way of visiting Yangshuo is, because Yangshuo is a small town in Guangxi, you go to Guilin and then you take a raft down the Li River. It's where the back of the 20 RMB bill. That's
Yes.
that's the scenery on it. Yeah, just go there
Yes.
and you can do a day or two in Yangshuo. I don't know about now, but when I went, everything there was like super cheap. Like a
Oh yeah,
big
really
plate
cheap.
of yeah, like a big plate of what is it called? Is it called like water spinach? 空心菜.
Oh yeah, some kind of spinach. I think the translation's water spinach. Yeah.
2 RMB, 3 people couldn't finish it.
So good. I miss the cheap food in China. I really do. You don't get cheap food like that in Taiwan.
In central Taiwan, you do, but even Tainan now is kind of expensive. Like when I was
Right.
doing my service in
Yeah.
Nantou, it was pretty cheap. Like you could still get like lunches for less than 100 Taiwan dollars.
Nice. Yeah, you kind of around the student areas here too, but yeah.
So when you were living in Yangshuo, what did you do there for work?
I was working for IPT. It was a travel company, is a travel company, who I first went to North Korea with. And I was working in their bar, supposedly doing travel stuff, but mainly working in the bar. And then I was moved up to Beijing with them as well. So yeah, making a living just doing that. And to be honest, I was only there for a few months, and it was the summer, and it was kind of like one of those summers that I reflect on, that I just finished university and I was just hanging out with friends and having fun in this new crazy environment. So bit of a wild one, yeah.
So speaking of that transition from Yangshuo to Beijing, that must have been a another set of culture shocks. What are some of the biggest differences you noticed right off the bat when you moved from Yangshuo to Beijing?
The biggest difference, and I think this is the same in any move from small village or town to a city, is that there's no immediate friendship group to hang out with. I had such a tight knit friendship group in Yangshuo, even though I was only there for like a few months. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone was super friendly and welcoming. And then you move to the big city and you're like, I don't know anyone. So that was really tough. It felt a little bit lonely. I was also living like not in central Beijing at all. I was living in Tongzhou, which is about a 40-minute to an hour subway journey out into East Beijing. Tongzhou is actually the now like government capital of Beijing. I think they moved all the government stuff to Tongzhou.
Yeah, the city government.
It's also where they built and opened the Universal Studios. Beijing is now in Tongzhou, just where I used to live. But at that time, there was nothing there. So it was very isolating. And it took a while for me to find friends, stuff like that. But in the end, just like anywhere, I kind of got over that by putting myself out there, meeting some people, and the first people I met in China are still, my best mates today. I went to the wedding of one of them last year, and I just kind of met them through learning Chinese and going to lessons and hangouts and stuff like that. But apart from the people aspect, Beijing it's big. There's so much going on. It's so cool. There's so much culture. It's very, very different just to look at, obviously. It's got so much modern and so much traditional there as well. In Yangshuo, you just have beautiful, beautiful scenery. And that accent is very different. I wasn't used to this kind of really harsh Beijing accent, but actually to a learner of Chinese, it's much easier to learn the Beijing accent than this kind of Southern Chinese really soft accent that, you also have in Taiwan as well. In Beijing, you speak really harsh, but everyone, when I first got to Taiwan, everyone loves, and they still compliment me actually on my kind of Beijing or really Biaojun, like a really standard way of speaking Taiwanese. A lot of Taiwanese will say to me like, "Wow, your Guoyu, your Chinese is like better than mine," and I think they mean that in like the accent that they use, because Taiwanese like swallow their words a lot, and yeah, their accent is very, very soft. So I have Beijing to thank for that.
There isn't much of how would you say, like, 阴阳顿挫 when people over here speak Mandarin, like the fluctuations between the
Yeah, really, really, yeah. And like I feel like a lot of the time the words like F and H and like stuff like that just completely get swallowed. And like I know what people are saying because of I know what word they're trying to say, but they're just saying it with a completely different letter. At least that's what it sounds like to me, because they're just saying it so softly.
Oh, you're not hearing it wrong. It's because in Hokkien there isn't the F sound. It's kind of like Korean doesn't have the F sound, but they replace it with the P. Over here, like Hokkien speakers, like you're probably talking about boomers and older people who do that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. What is it like?
No,
Like instead of saying 吃饭 for eating, they might say like 吃饭 or 粗饭.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting.
Was the move to Beijing like around the time when you decided to take, the studying of Chinese more seriously?
Yes and no. I tried to learn Chinese as soon as I got to China. I love languages. It's my thing. But it helped being in Beijing. I could learn a lot more. I could go to language schools. And I knew that I would be there for at least a little bit of time. When I was in Yangshuo, I was like, okay, hanging out with more expats. And I didn't know how long I'd be in China for. But when I got to Beijing, I was like, okay, I'm going to be here for like at least a good few more months, maybe even a couple of years. I may as well start to try and integrate. And also it was because everything was so overwhelming. It was just a good way to kind of get to know the culture and get to know some friends as well by learning the language.
So it's basically knowing that you'd be in China on a slightly more permanent basis than you were sure of before kind of made you decide to break out or expand from the expat cocoon a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it was fueled by language learning. And to be honest, actually, there is a very big reason why I wanted to learn the Chinese language. And so I have a very severe food allergy, and like I don't publicize it, so I'm not going to say what it is here, but it's like a life-threatening food allergy. And so I needed to be able to, it sounds really silly, but I needed to be able to go to restaurants. And this food is like commonly found in Chinese food. It's all over East Asia. And I needed to be able to go to restaurants and not only tell them, like, hey, does this food have this thing in it? But I needed to describe to them, like, hey, if this food has this in it, I will die. So please go and ask your chef whether it has anything of the sort of this food in it or not. And then please come and report back to me. Because, like, so many times, even now, my Mandarin is pretty good. It still happens like once a month, even in Taiwan, that I will eat this thing. And now I'm so used to it, I have medication, obviously. But at that time, genuinely, that was my biggest motivation to learn the language, because I couldn't just take like a little slip of paper that said, I have this allergy, because they just do not understand at all. So yeah, that was the biggest motivation, but also wanting to I just love languages. And part of learning languages, I think one of the biggest aspects is learning the culture. And those things obviously go hand in hand. So I remember like my first introduction to Chinese culture was not actually like going out and stuff. It was literally, I started watching Chinese dramas and listening to Chinese music. And I just remember Chinese culture is so different, and there are so many aspects in Chinese dramas that you're just like, why is this happening? What is happening here? And you just come to kind of start to understand the culture a little bit more, and looking at song lyrics and stuff, you really do start to understand the culture. And yeah, so from then I started being more confident. Okay, like I'll go out, I'll make some Chinese friends, date some Chinese guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't really get the full experience of living abroad if you don't speak the language of where you're living
No.
and can't connect directly with most of the people there. But
Yeah.
as a foreigner who speaks Chinese quite well, I know you've had many interactions with average Joes on both sides of the strait from all walks of life over the past 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So among many Westerners and even many younger Taiwanese, there is this sort of idea that people in Taiwan are more knowledgeable and aware of the world outside of Taiwan than mainlanders are of the world outside of the Chinese mainland. Has this been the case according to your observations, or is the reality far more complicated than the simple matter of one side being more worldly than the other?
I think it is a tricky one. And I think the biggest factor, depending, which is the biggest contributing factor, is not where you're from, but probably your age, I think, first of all. Um, and also what you're talking about when you say, like, interested in the outside, interested in foreign culture, and aware of the outside world. I think Taiwanese are probably more educated on the outside world, potentially. But again, I don't know. It's a really tricky one, to be honest. I think Taiwanese people potentially. Yeah. Again, every time I try and say something, I'm like, oh no, maybe not. I was going to say maybe they care more about what's going on in the outside world. But again, at the same time, I think some of them are really kind of apathetic to what's going on in the outside world. So for me, it really depends on the person. I have to say, I can't say between Taiwanese and Chinese, but I will probably say that it depends on what age you are, what kind of place you live. If you're talking about Beijingers versus people from Yangshuo, you're probably like going to have a really big difference in like how interested people are in the outside world. On average, maybe like mainlanders are more interested in and care more, have more pride about their own like affairs going on in their own country. So probably are a little bit more kind of looking inside than outside. But yeah, it's a tricky question, genuinely, and I don't think it's as easy as black and white as some people might say. There are so many very well educated mainlanders and very, who are very educated on the outside world, just as there are lots of Taiwanese who, have no idea what's going on in the outside world.
That's basically what I found too, from my observations. I've seen
Yeah.
people on the mainland just know a lot about the outside world, or even about, some people from more rural areas might not know too much about what's going on outside. I mean, that's changing now with smartphones and TikTok especially, but even like 10 years ago, I think though one of the biggest differences among certain crowds, and this is not a generalization for everyone on either side, is people on the mainland tend to understand that their media reflects a certain perspective. It's undeniable. So people who are a bit more critical will view the news with this fact in mind, whereas a lot of people in Taiwan go with the assumption that the media here is neutral, or they only go so far as to consider a news outlet's blue or green leanings into consideration, blue being like the more KMT camp, green being the more DPP camp.
Yeah.
And they'll ignore how the fact that almost all of the news channels here are partially owned by American asset management firms or people with ties to them. Just a few examples off of the top of my head. Sanli, which is a pan green station, is
Yeah.
owned by Cai Mingzong, Daniel Cai, who was one of the guys in charge of Fubang Financial Holdings. And Fubang's shareholders include Vanguard and BlackRock. And of course there's like the Communist Party of China. Entities like Vanguard and BlackRock have a very clear agenda. It's just they operate a little bit more behind the scenes, and a lot of people might not even know what Vanguard and BlackRock are. And or even on the other side, ETTV, for example. ETTV is a more blue-leaning channel. It's partially owned by Dimensional Fund Advisors, McKinsey Financial, Northern Trust Investments, but a lot of people, even in Taiwan, don't know this fact. So they're assuming that the information they're getting is more or less neutral and unbiased, especially on outside affairs. And they'll operate with the assumption that, the biases are only, to the point of internal politics or cross-strait affairs. So they have a tendency, from my observation, to let their guard down and aren't as critical. But of course, you also have plenty of people who question things more, and they're aware of how the media in any country can mislead people or provide people with an incomplete picture. So on this topic of being misled, there's this perception among pro-China Westerners that to love China means to hate Taiwan, and among anti-China Westerners that to hate China means to love Taiwan. And this applies to nearly everything in their view, not just politics. But instead of blindly following this hype, which I find quite disrespectful to people on both sides of the strait, by the way, why don't we talk about the average person's attitude on the mainland towards all things Taiwan and vice versa, from just interactions you've had?
I want to say something about the point that you said before, because I find it really interesting, and then remind me about what you just asked me in a sec, because I know I'm going to forget it. But it reminds me of something that I really agree with you, and it reminds me of something that a North Korean once said to me, which was that they don't look at what is reported in the media. To them, it's not interesting what is in the media and what they're reading in the newspaper, it's what's not reported. So they can tell more about what's not in the media. For example, if something is not reported, then they're like, oh, okay, what happened with that, blah, blah, blah. So my point is that they're very critical consumers of media. Because they don't trust it. And they're very aware of that. They're very aware that, it's propaganda, it's from the state, they can't trust their media. So they are critical consumers of it. We, on the other hand, as the point you made, in democracies, you kind of presume that the media is telling you what you need to know, and it's telling you pretty much how you should feel about it. And I think, we presume that the media is telling us things that we need to know, and it's leaving out the bits that we don't need to know, which is completely not true. And I think that, we generally trust even though we might not trust the opinion that our media has, we live in our own echo chambers that, even if we read one article, and it doesn't back up our opinion or whatever, we just keep consuming. And then, yeah, you're just backed up by, so many opinions that are the same as yours that you're like, well, hey, this is the only opinion that there is because that's the only media that you're being, shown through social media and through your own friend groups and stuff like that, these perpetuating echo chambers. So I think, yes, our media, so I argue that our media, the media in the UK, the media in a lot of democracies is more dangerous than that in North Korea because of this lack of, because of this passive consumption that people do of the media. So yeah, just had to say a little bit on that. Can you say your question one more time? Sorry.
I think well, basically a lot of Westerners or non-Chinese people who have strong opinions on cross-strait affairs on like mainland China or Taiwan basically have their understanding of the affairs over here entirely through media. It's not like they've really lived here and really gotten to know the culture, gotten to know the people. So there's this sort of false consciousness among them, which is, oh, if you love China, that means you have to hate Taiwan. And if you love Taiwan, that means you have to hate China, and they apply this to everything, not just politics. And I find this quite disrespectful to the people on both sides of the strait. So, I mean, you've lived on both sides of the strait and you've talked to a lot of people with varying opinions. So why don't you we talk about the average person's attitude on the mainland towards all things Taiwan and vice versa? Because I'm sure you've heard all sorts of different opinions.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Let's start with the easier one. Everyone in the mainland loves Taiwan that I've ever spoken to. I can't really say anything else apart from that because I've never had a political conversation with anyone from the mainland about Taiwan, apart from one time I remember accidentally, saying that I was playing actually stupid and hilarious. I couldn't believe the reaction of my friend. Very westernized Chinese who'd gone to university in Canada. And we were playing a game where you had to name the country name as quickly as possible with the letter that you were given, blah, 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 whatever. So I said Taiwan. And he flipped out. Oh my gosh, walked out of the house, literally very angry. And this is like a westernized Chinese mainland person who, went to university in Canada for 4 years. So that gives you the kind of degree of, one, the kind of pride and patriotism that mainland Chinese people feel towards Taiwan. They really, it's their country. And there's no other consciousness that exists in their minds that Taiwan could possibly be its own country. That doesn't exist, and they get very defensive when you mention anything like that to them. So I've never had any political debate with any Chinese about Taiwan, but they all love it, province of China. And they love it because of its Japanese aspects. I think it's cute, and the girls speak in a really cute way. And
I hate that.
Yeah, same. And I really realized it last time when I left last year when I went back to mainland China finally in March, and I came back and I ordered a coffee here, and this girl was just talking in this really high pitched, typical like Japanese style way, and I was like, oh my gosh, like someone just speak to me in a harsh Beijing accent again, please. But I think obviously that is also something that's like sexualized within mainland Chinese men as well. They kind of see these like cutesy Taiwanese girls. So I guess that's the opinions that I've kind of picked up from mainlanders about Taiwan. And in terms of Taiwanese towards the mainland, it really depends who you talk to. Obviously, you can have a lot more political debates here, and I try and do that a lot because I study politics and I'm generally really interested. I'm interested in getting a lot of different opinions, and obviously it's not something that I walk around on the street asking complete randomers. I think you have to be politically sensitive about these things. And so I'll only ever talk to friends or people that I feel comfortable around with this. And it just so happens that most of my friends in Taiwan generally over the age of like 50 or so, because I have like a like running group that I run with. And I think the opinion with them is also divided, actually. Some of them think that, you know, Taiwan, it's inevitable that it will become part of China one day, and they want it to because of the economic benefits. They don't really see this whole like China-Taiwan split thing, whereas others are like more just whatever, we don't care as long as everyone's safe. They just kind of don't want war again, like their parents had to suffer or whatever. And so you really start to feel the Taiwanese patriotism in the younger generation, I think. They have a very big disconnect between mainland China. And if there's one vibe that I've picked up recently, that people are telling me when they talk to me about it and they tell me that it's recent, is actually this fear of going to mainland China. A lot of Taiwanese now are saying that it's that they personally fear the security risk of going to mainland China. It used to be a lot easier. It used to be a lot more friendly, but now, a lot of them are scared. And obviously, like, I'll talk to them about like, hey, come to North Korea with me, and they're fine with going to North Korea. And then I'm like, oh, but you do have to go through China first. They're like, ooh, I can't go to China. So yeah, I would say that everyone, actually, even the older generation, the younger generation, is more conscious about whether it's present or not. They are more conscious about a security risk. And one more thing that I will say about the interesting point that you brought up about, loving China means hating Taiwan, blah, and vice versa. I feel that a lot with the Western media, and I feel that I'm really interested in how much and I'm thinking about writing a paper on it, actually, how much the Western media is reporting on Taiwan at the moment, and how it's presented as this big security risk currently from, threats from China. And I don't know if you knew or you remember, in The Economist, I think must have been 2022 or 2023, it had on the cover that Taiwan was the most dangerous country in the world, because of, it's absolutely ridiculous, because it just doesn't match. I don't know whether it actually matches or not. That's what I want to do research on. But when you talk to the people and you ask them, do you feel more scared and more threatened now than before? Regardless of what I just said about the security threat, I meant that security threat is them going to mainland China. But in Taiwan, they don't feel any more threatened than they did before. At least the people that I've spoken to have all, like, everyone, 100% has said this to me. They don't feel any more threat. And it's really interesting because everyone, like, my parents were concerned me moving over to Taiwan because, is it safe there? Everyone thinks that it's this really dangerous place to be at the moment. And I don't know whether this is because it's true, because there have been more threats from China, blah, 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 or whether, and what my instinct tells me is whether it's the Western media kind of reporting on it more, and hyping it up more. And the reason that I think that they're reporting on it more is because loving Taiwan means hating China. And hating China is in at the moment in, the West. And I really think that that's the case. Like, backing Taiwan automatically means that you are going against China. And I think for a lot of like Western governments, that's a really easy way to go against China without actually doing anything against China, if you know what I mean.
And I know you don't like to be too political on your content, but I just wanted to make a comment how I think a lot of people in the West are trying to draw parallels between the two sides of the strait with Russia and Ukraine. But I do want to repeat, Beijing is not Moscow and Taipei is not Kiev. And a lot of times what media doesn't cover is like the entire context of this conflict, and also action and reaction. I mean, both sides are actually very calculated actors, and they're not stupid. I mean, if the leadership here were as careless and reckless as Ukraine, then I would argue it would be a pretty scary place to live. But that is simply not the case. And Beijing on the world stage is in a very different position from Moscow. Moscow, when the attack on Ukraine happened, was pretty much backed into the corner by NATO, whereas Beijing has so much leverage economically on the rest of the world that time is on its side, and everything keeps on being more and more in its favor, despite increased sanctions and these sorts of trends. So I think it's kind of like how people in the past years, Americans with children going to like work in South Korea get really scared. They're all like, oh, but isn't North Korea gonna set Seoul ablaze and bomb them back to the Stone Age or whatever? And it's like, people in South Korea, they just don't really care about it. They're just like, whatever, just another day, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, I also think a lot of people don't understand how much of Taiwan's cultural influence is seen on the mainland. Surely you've seen a lot of that influence before you even set foot in Taiwan. And I bet at the beginning of your time on mainland China, you didn't even realize that a lot of the cultural influence was from Taiwan, but then you noticed later on gradually, right?
Maybe. I find it really hard to associate. This is one thing that I do find actually, is that Taiwanese culture, I have to say, is very far removed from mainland Chinese culture. But maybe you're going to tell me something different. What would be your example, like, of something obvious that I've kind of missed here?
Well, I mean, like pop culture, like music artists, for example, like one of the most popular artists, like Zhou Jie Jay Chou.
Okay, yeah. Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of.
But apart from that, like what?
Well, I mean, a lot of their entertainment stuff, because like for the longest time, Taiwan was the cultural capital of the Mandarin speaking world, and Hong Kong was the Cantonese one, and the two sides worked together a lot in this regard. So a lot of the earlier Chinese celebrities that were famous throughout the entire Sinosphere in the world were Taiwan-based. I mean, for example, I guess this applies more to boomers, but people like Deng Lijun, for example, very popular on the mainland. There was a saying, we listen to Deng Xiaoping by day and we listen to Deng Lijun at night.
That's cute. Yeah, I guess like in terms of popular culture and stuff, the obvious ones would be music and I can think of a lot of music that even I was singing in KTV in Beijing, and then it wasn't until I came to Taiwan that I realized, oh, hey, that's a Taiwanese artist. But I find, apart from that, I find it actually really hard to connect mainland Chinese and Taiwanese culture. Apart from, maybe it's because I'm looking at it in a very kind of deep way. There are the obvious connections that, that are very obvious. But I think I relate a lot more Taiwanese culture to Japanese culture, I have to say. And I'm talking more in a, when I say culture, I'm talking less of pop culture, music, video, TV series, stuff like that, and more like anthropologically, like people, how they behave and how they talk.
There certainly is that influence, but also I think another factor is you're comparing to like Beijing and Yangshuo. Visit Xiamen sometime. You'll find it's very similar, but also there's some differences, but it's also like very similar in so many ways, especially if you talk to boomers there.
Right.
It's like almost exactly the same as talking to boomers over here.
Yeah, that's another good point that I think everyone should realize as well. It's like China's massive, and it's very hard to say like what mainland people are like, because they're so different. I mean, you touched on it at the start that Northerners are a lot harsher than Southerners. They're very soft in both the way that they speak and how they act and stuff, compared to Northerners who are literally taller and look stronger and muscly and have bigger faces and speak to you in a very harsh way. I don't know. It's all very different. But
I think the reverse of cultural influence, especially pop culture, is also true. I mean, despite increased political tensions in the past few years, especially if you leave Taipei, where a lot of people watch Netflix, you go to the more rural areas, they're watching a bunch of these dramas about the imperial courts of ancient China and stuff like that. Yeah. I'll say that when I got here, people are asking me how I
learn Chinese. And like, funnily enough, I still remember it. The first drama that I started watching, I realized after a few years was actually a Taiwanese drama that I was watching in Beijing.
Let me guess, it's either 包青天 or 还珠格格.
It's neither of those. And you know what? I literally Googled it the other day because there's this actor in it that I really like and he popped up again. But I can't remember the name. Anyway, it's just a typical, I think it's like Those Were the Days or something like that. And I can't remember the Chinese translation. Anyway, I'll send it to you after. It's awful. Like, it's just one of those school dramas, fall in love, blah, blah, blah. But it is one of those, it sticks with me because this is an example of learning about the culture because they used, numbers can sometimes mean phrases in Chinese. So 520 is like 我爱你, like 520. Yeah. Yeah. They use that kind of thing as part of this drama. I think it was like they're trying to say 我爱你一辈子, and I can't remember which numbers those are, but
5201314是 5201314 我爱你一生一世.
Yes, that one, exactly.
Do you know 748?
And that's just an example. No, what's 748? Okay.
Say it in Chinese.
748.
748 sounds like 去死吧, like go die or go to hell.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was like 7 and then ba, your dad. Okay. Okay, ba, makes sense. Yeah, there's just one of those examples where you can learn so much about the culture. I can't remember what I was trying to say.
No, you were watching one of those cheesy shows and you found out later that it was Taiwanese.
Yeah, I was going to say something before that, but anyway, yeah, no, there is a lot. Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Everyone was really surprised, like why my Taiwanese friends are like, why were you watching Taiwanese dramas? Like Taiwanese dramas suck. Like they watch like mainland Chinese stuff, like films and dramas, because it's a lot better. And when you look at the production value and stuff, they put in so much money into Chinese films, and some of them are awesome. Like some of them are really, really good. Some of my favorite films are Chinese films.
Nowadays.
Yeah, nowadays. Not
yeah.
In the 80s.
Because in the 80s, it was the opposite. They were watching our dramas because they were
exactly.
better produced over here. I think from all of your answers, it's pretty obvious that things aren't that clear cut. For example, you know how hip hop became so big in Taiwan? I mean, the original Mandarin rap kind of had its start in Taiwan and then it spread to the mainland. But then rap was always somewhat underground, and then after MC Hot Dog won his Golden Melody Award in 2007, it became kind of more mainstream but still mostly underground. But then there was this TV show on mainland China on primetime TV called Rap in China.
Yes, I used to watch it.
And half of the judges were Taiwanese.
Oh, I didn't realize that they were Chinese. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I used to watch it.
Yeah, MC Hot Dog and Zhang Zhenyue.
I didn't. See, this is the funny things that like all come together. Like I literally went to see MC Hot Dog in a festival when I first got here, like last year. But I was watching Rap in China and had no idea that he was one of the judges. So, yeah, China and they're lots of things overflows all the time with Taiwan and China, I guess.
Which is why there's more to Taiwan than the politics. A lot of people have this understanding that the history of Taiwan begins and ends in 1949, and then they jump to the present day, which is to say they don't really know anything about Taiwan at all.
Yes.
And I think it's very disgusting for people to say they're pro-Taiwan, not because they care about the people or culture, but simply because they hate the Communist Party of China.
And I agree with that. Because a lot of people do. A lot of people are pro-Taiwan because they dislike China. And I really feel that in the foreigners that come here, in the foreigners that are here, and then also on a wider scale of like the Western media and stuff. And yeah, people don't, will come to Taiwan and travel and stuff like that. And they feel like they're doing something anti-China by doing so. And I'm like, you should love Taiwan for Taiwan, not, yeah.
That was kind of my motivation behind creating this podcast, because there's so much ignorance out there. I just wanted to give more context to the things that people see in the media regarding these matters so they can make more informed judgments, whatever their positions might be. So I'm curious, as somebody who's lived on both sides and is actually normal, what were it sounded judgmental, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, wouldn't say normal, but
What were some of the biggest culture shocks for you when you first came to Taiwan? I know you mentioned that the whole what is it, high pitched anime voice that some of the
Yeah.
women here exhibit that can't be
It's
natural.
not natural.
And what are some similarities you've seen on the two sides? Similarities and differences.
Biggest culture shocks for sure is how I behave and how I act. And I'm talking not from a British perspective, but from someone who's lived in China for a good few years and not only lives in China, but like loves the culture. Like China is like my place. Like I love China. I love so much about China. I love the culture. Have immersed myself so much in it that it got to the point where I would go back to the UK to see friends for a week and they would be like, you can't say that or you can't act like that. Because as you were saying before, you know, a lot of Chinese culture can seem very rude, whereas it's rude if you take it out of the Chinese context and put it in the UK, but it's not rude in China. You know, it's just how people behave, and you've either got to get on board with it, or you get taken down a river and you can't, you know, you're just not going to survive in China. So
Did you tell your friend, hey, did you get fat? Something along those lines.
no, not quite. But actually, what did happen is I ended up pulling out. I think I might have told you this before, actually. But I ended up, I was at a bar, and they like a riverside bar, so it had like outside tables and stuff. And I brought my friends something from North Korea and China. Um, and I look back now and I was like, that is such a weird thing to do, but it felt so normal at the time. We were like sitting at this pub table outside, and I like bring my friends these things like, oh, hey guys, look at what I got you guys from North Korea and China. And I pulled out this entire whole dried fish from North Korea, and then a bottle of baijiu. And I was like, okay, seems like a perfectly normal thing to do. Let's try this baijiu and rip up this dry fish in the middle of this like pub in the middle of London. And I look back and like that was just a normal thing to do. And I look back now and I was like, my friends must have thought I was mental.
Did you bring soy sauce and horseradish as well?
No, I should have done. That's what I was thinking. We were missing like the vinegar and stuff, but that would have been that. Well, I thought at the time that would have been a bit too over the top, but clearly I'd already gone over the top anyway. Um, yeah, the biggest thing is my behavior. I feel like when I speak a different language, same when I'm speaking in Japanese. You hate the, cutesy Japanese voice. Just wait until you hear me speak in Japanese. I can do that high-pitched, stupid anime voice, and I do because that is what you you should sound like when you're in Japan. So I really, yeah. そうですか? Yeah. So
Cringe.
I think I change my behavior. I do change my behavior according to what language I'm speaking in. And because I came to Taiwan, I was speaking in Chinese. But I quickly found that, you know, when you're in a restaurant, you can't just shout out really loudly at the top of your voice, "Fuyer," and try and like get attention and stuff. You have to be very polite about it. And you can't like get angry at people easily. I feel like when I first got here, like Chinese people are very, what is the good translation for like 很凶, 很凶? Like,
I don't want to say aggressive, but abrasive?
yeah, but it's not aggressive. Yeah, okay, maybe abrasive. They
Stern.
seem very, yeah, stern, abrasive, but it doesn't come across. You're just being very forceful with your opinions, maybe. Anyway, I remember
Assertive.
yes, maybe assertive. I was trying to get the Taiwanese license, the driving license, and the people behind the counter were being very unhelpful. And they literally just kept speaking in Taiwanese to me. And I don't understand Taiwanese. I especially didn't after just being here for 1 week. And so I started like arguing back in a very stern and assertive Chinese kind of manner, like, why are you speaking to me like this? Blah, blah, blah. And in mainland China, that would have been completely acceptable. But I think I probably definitely pissed her off some more because then she just kind of got up and left and was saying something in Taiwanese to the next person to stand next to her. So I think, yeah, that my biggest shock was having to adapt my behavior. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not an impolite person. It's literally like doing things like that is fine in China. It was just trying to adapt it to life here. Um, and other big culture shocks, I think, I know I've said this several times over this podcast now already, but just the similarities to Japan. They just found it everywhere, from literal physical similarities to going in the 7-Eleven and realizing that the 7-Eleven, offers all the same random everything services that they do in Japan, from everything from like printing to buying your concert tickets to buying a spare pair of underpants, like the 7-Elevens do everything here, very similar to Japan. And the inconvenience. My God, Taiwan is inconvenient compared to mainland China. Oh, and I'd forgotten how convenient mainland.
This, right?
Yes, money. Who needs physical money when you have WeChat? Oh, and this was really emphasized to me when I went back to Beijing last March, and everything is just so easy. Even though I hadn't been there for like 3 years from COVID, I just slipped right back into the society, like re-downloaded like a couple of apps. There Google Maps, I just re-downloaded it. I hadn't used it in years, and I was like, "Oh, I've kind of forgotten how to use this." But and then I'm like, "Oh, okay, I can order food on this. Oh, okay, I can also order a taxi. Really, I can order a taxi on this." And I press the button, and the taxi is literally there within like 30 seconds. And then obviously I pay for my taxi via WeChat money. It's just so easy. And then I remember I get back to Taiwan that same week. I had to transfer some money to a friend who helped me buy tickets for something. And I had to go to a physical ATM, and then the ATM wouldn't accept the transaction because for some reason I was pressing the wrong button. So then I went to my bank and I was like, "Hey, I'm trying to transfer this money to this person." And I'm like, "Can I do it here?" And they're like, "No, you have to do it at the ATM." I'm like, "I'm literally in the bank right now. Can I not just do it with you?" And he's like, "No, no, but I'll take you to the ATM." So then we had to go to the ATM, and it's, it literally took me about half a day to try and figure out how to transfer money to a friend, when in China it's just like literally a click of a button. Oh, yeah, that is the biggest thing. The inconvenience, or the convenience. I won't say the inconvenience of Taiwan, because Taiwan is similar to most countries in that aspect, but the convenience of mainland China. No foreigner would understand it unless you've been there.
Yeah. Now, speaking of money, what about the cost of living? I know this one is a little bit hard to generalize because there's probably a greater difference between, say, Beijing and Yangshuo than there is between, say, Taipei and Chengdu. But where do you find life a bit more affordable? But then there's also the factor of how you were working full time on the mainland, whereas over here you're a student. So
That's the biggest factor, that I was just going to say, because I will always say like, "Oh my gosh, China's so cheap. Beijing was so cheap." And then yeah, look at actually how expensive things are. And I think the biggest factor affecting that is the fact that I was working in Beijing and had money, and here I'm a student, and so think everything is expensive. But there are some things that are noticeably cheaper and more expensive. I would say Taiwan. The living costs in general in Taiwan are a little more expensive. And I'll only say they're more expensive because there is no cheaper option. I feel like in China, there's everything from like uber cheap to like uber expensive. And that is with everything from like accommodation to food to getting your hair cut. There is always like a big scale. And in Taiwan, there's less of like this big scale. It's more of like the cheapest option is still like, it's fine, it's affordable, but it's not like cheap. Whereas in China, you can get some really good bargains. And there's also loads of like super awesome deals. I would never pay a full price for anything in China. I would go and get my nails done and make sure that it's at least like 80% discount, because like using like, what is it? Dianping. You just get crazy discounts. I remember I got my teeth cleaned and like stuff like that for like a couple of dollars, like very, very cheap, as long as you find. But there's nothing like that in Taiwan. And services, hospitality. is very, very cheap in China and amazing quality. Getting a massage, getting your nails done, all those girly things, a lot cheaper in mainland China and a lot more choice. And what I find is that accommodation is disproportionately expensive in Taiwan. I don't know if you found.
That pisses me off so much.
Yeah, I'm like, why are hotels so expensive here? Like, it doesn't make any sense. I know that there's like, you know, Taiwan is an island. It's of course it's gonna like its rent is expensive and stuff like that. But even like rent is actually fairly okay, at least in Tainan. But hotels, like you can't really get a hotel stay or anything like that for like less than 1,000 NTD, which is what how many RMB? I don't know.
Divide by 4.
But it's about how much dollars? Is it like $30?
A little bit north of 30 US dollars.
Yeah, which is like really weird to me in that Taiwan is relatively affordable in so many other aspects. And $30 probably sounds like not much for a night at a hotel for any US listeners, but in East Asia, I feel like you get a lot of cheaper deals than that. I don't know. Have you found that as well? Like Taiwan, like it's impossible to get a nice hotel here for a decent cost.
Especially if you go to places like Sun Moon Lake or
Yeah,
Ice, and they're
they are
very expensive.
crazy.
I was thinking about traveling the entire island after I finished my service, and then I just thought of the hotel prices, right? And I was just like, you know what, this can wait until I make more money.
Yeah, genuinely.
Going to the mainland instead.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, honestly. Like, so I'm going actually there on Saturday this week. I'm going to go to Beijing for a wedding and then to Chiangbai-shan. It's going to be fun. But literally looking up hotels and stuff like that there, I was like, oh my gosh, so cheap. Like we're talking over like 200, 300 NT for like nice hotel rooms. I was like, yeah, so worth it. Yeah, like actually worth it. And I will always say this, like I don't mind spending money on things that are worth it. Like a nice meal that's like $100, if it's worth it, sure. A nice hotel, if it's $300, then sure, if it's worth it. But I find that it's disproportionate in Taiwan. Like no hotel is worth its price. That's just what I found.
So, being here, I mean, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but you used to work in North Korea tourism, and North Korea's been closed for 4 years now. So, how have you been keeping busy these past 4 years besides, doing your studies over here?
It's been a weird 4 years. I literally spent the first year and a half stuck in Tonga, which is a whole different story. And I had only ever done a bachelor's before, like an undergrad. I never anticipated going back to education. So I spent my first year doing my master's, my first master's, because I was basically in Tonga and I was stuck there, long story short. I needed something to do and I was waiting to get back into China. So I did my master's, which in the UK is only 1 year. I did it all online. And then waited for COVID to be over, and COVID still wasn't over. So then I did another master's, thinking that COVID would definitely be over by the time that my second master's was finished. Turns out it wasn't. When I'm talking about COVID being over, I'm talking in terms of North Korea mainly, and their borders opening. So I started PhD, and that's generally what I've been keeping up with. But I still work, so I still do stuff with Koryo Tours. I do their marketing and stuff, and I generally keep busy by doing a load of random freelance stuff. I write blogs, I do various stuff on social media. I've been trying to keep up my YouTube and then not, and then starting a podcast and then not doing a few episodes for ages now, but that's starting again after I go to Chiangbai-shan. I'm going to start it back up with that episode. And yeah, just trying to get back into travel and stuff. And I think I've been so focused on getting back to North Korea these past 4 years. And North Korea still isn't open now. I've been so focused on getting back that, I haven't given myself a chance to do anything else really. And it was only recently, that my whole like social media identity was about North Korea. And I think I've started expanding that out now to be more like media and politics, which is what my PhD is about. And more about, kind of expanding the narrative. And I hope in the future to kind of expand that out to places, especially in the Middle East. Actually, I'm really focused on at the moment. So I hope to kind of branch out more into that. But yeah, keeping busy is not hard for me because I'm always doing like 50,000 other things, but nothing really ends up coming into too much. So
For listeners who don't know, Changbaisan is the mountain that's right on the border between China and Korea. And in Korea, they call it Baekdusan.
Baitoshan.
Yeah, the Korean name for the mountain, Baekdusan, would be read as Baitoshan in Chinese, but we call it Changbaisan in China. It's the same mountain, but half of it's in Korea and half of it's in China. Well, South Korea considers all of it to be part of Korea, and they consider North Koreans sellouts for settling the border dispute with China and making it half and half.
I was wondering what if there's a different way to call it in Taiwan as there is in mainland, because obviously it's called Changbaishan, but in characters in Japan they call it Baitoshan. So I was wondering, in Taiwan, do you call it Baitoshan or Changbaishan?
Changbaisan.
It is Changbaishan. Okay.
Yeah. Because you gotta remember, like when my parents were growing up, they had to learn like Chinese geography of all of China, not just the current borders, but the bigger ROC borders, including Outer Mongolia.
Someone was telling me that, like one of my running friends was telling me that they, in school, they literally had to learn the rail networks of Beijing and stuff. And I was like, this is wild. Like, but of course, like at that time, I guess it was more of like okay, well, this will be our country sometime. We'll take over the mainland sometime soon.
Well, you gotta remember, it's a civil war, so the retreat to Taiwan was not the founding of a new country. So similarly, mainlanders learn about Taiwan's geography, and North Koreans learn about South Korean geography, and vice versa. So on this topic, I guess you kind of miss one of your homes in Asia. So that's why you're going so close to Korea from the Chinese side. But when do you anticipate North Korea tours restarting? And when they do restart, how can listeners, aside from Americans and South Koreans, sign up for one?
The second question is a lot easier to answer than the first one. Second question, head over to Choreo Tours, choreogroup.com. You can find all the tours there. If I can just do some shameless promo there. If you have any questions as well, you can always message me or like have a look through my Instagram and TikTok videos and stuff like that. Don't message me on TikTok, but have a look through my Instagram. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me there, like asking what's the best tour to go on, blah, blah, blah. But it's super easy. You literally find a tour company, book through them, and then they sort out all your visa. Honestly, the hardest part is getting your Chinese visa and getting through China. North Korea stuff is easy. When it's going to open, however, I have no idea. I fluctuate. And it's funny because I don't know when you're putting this out, but it's April right now. And I had made a promise to myself last year that if the North Korean borders haven't opened by April, then I will have to move on with life. So it's April now. So that's why I'm kind of in a different mindset of, I'm going to have to start trying to do something different, because a lot of the things that I've wanted to do, I've like put my life on hold, right, to try and get back to North Korea, because I didn't want to get another full-time job because I wanted to do the North Korea stuff. I really did. And so I haven't, had a job for the past 4 years, which obviously is a bit damaging on the old bank account. And it's horrible going from earning money back to studying, because you know what it's like when you earn money. But yeah, so I said April because there was some talk that it might open by the Day of the Sun. And this has kind of been said for the past a long time now. For the past year, people are talking about, oh, maybe it'll be open by the Day of the Sun. And it was looking positive, like it really was going to happen. But I mean, that's in like a couple of days' time. And it's not going to happen. So, yeah. That's not to say like, I've given up on it completely. But it's to say that I can't prioritize it anymore.
Right. So you visited the DMZ and Korea from both the North and the South. And 2 years ago, you visited Jinmen or Kunmen and Matsu, two island groups in Fujian Province on the other side of the Taiwan Strait, but under the control of Taipei. So obviously the political climate between Taiwan and the mainland is very different today than relations between North and South Korea. But from 1949 until 1993 for Jinmen and 1994 for Matsu, residents of Taiwan could go to either set of islands because they were basically treated like the DMZ between Taiwan and the mainland. So, that being said, were there some similarities between the two Civil War front lines, and what was it like?
Yes. So I will just mention that when you mention DMZ, a lot of people think about those blue huts in North Korea, right? And South Korea. I think it's important to just mention that for those that don't realize, the DMZ is like a long span. It's not just those blue huts. The DMZ is actually like a line across the country, right? Going from east to west or west to east. And so I have been to those blue huts from the North Korea side, but I've never been from the South Korea side. But I have been to different like observatories and along the DMZ from the south side. So just to kind of make that clear, because those blue huts are pretty unique, but when you're talking about the DMZ in general, there's loads of similarities, physical similarities between what I saw in Jinmen and not so much Mazu, actually. I felt it way more in Jinmen than Mazu. But, well, firstly, all over Mazu, all over Jinmen, there's military checkpoints, and they're not in use. They're just like old little military boxes where it's obvious that an officer used to stand in there. The hostel that I stayed in, Mazu, used to be like a military. I think it was a military bunker, and now they've changed it into a hostel. And interestingly enough, I think it was the owner was telling me that they used to own that building and the building opposite it. But then when the Taiwanese army were in place, they basically like forced them to like buy it off them, because it was like a really strategic position, like looking out to the sea. So really interesting. And you really get the sense of Taiwan being like under martial law and stuff. Like you never get that sense that like, Taiwan is such a relaxed, cool, chill country now. But when you're on Mazu and Jinmen, you can see relics of like military past, and you really get a feel of like, oh, there's a lot of military presence here, even though it's already gone. It's not living anymore. Just like the checkpoints that I was saying, little slogans, so many propaganda slogans, like what's the one? Take back the mainland. How do we say that again?
反攻大陆.
Yeah. And
急救大陆同胞, save our mainland compatriots, 杀猪拔毛.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you see them all over the place. This is more Mazu. You see the propaganda slogans all over the walls, in big letters along the coast. Really interesting. But Jinmen was more intense in the way that you see a lot of like actual physical things, like along the coastline they have I have no idea what they're called, either in English or in Chinese, but these basically things to protect the coastline, these big structures that kind of look like, when you look at them, it looks like some kind of tank that's pointing out to the sea, but it's not. I presume they used to be really spiky to stop boats basically coming ashore, or either that or they were in place to stop people coming up. I don't know, but there's loads of structures like that all over the walls. In the seaside areas, there's like glass that has been put in cement, and obviously that's to stop people like climbing up from the sea. It's all been shaved down now, so it's not harmful anymore, but it's still there. It's still physically there. just a really high, you really do feel like the high military presence. And I remember, people recalled to me in Taiwan not so long ago that you can't be at the beach at night. Still, they don't let you at the beach at night. You know, even now, if you try and like chill at the beach with some friends, in Tainan, then the police will come, and whether it's because they're worried that you're causing a commotion, which I don't think it is, or because they're worried that maybe it's from previous worries and just this inherent like worry that, oh, they'll come from mainland China and the beach is an unsafe place at night, blah blah blah. I don't know, but people not so long ago, maybe the last decade or two, they weren't allowed to at the beach at night for explicitly for that reason. And I think that's all over Taiwan. That's not just Jinmen and Mazu. But you really feel that a lot more in Jinmen and Mazu. But saying that as well, one of the interesting things I found there was, especially Jinmen, they're very pro-China. Jinmen is the only place that I've ever been in that I've seen someone watch CCTV on the TV in a restaurant, which is the mainland Chinese. It's like the BBC of mainland China, but obviously state-run. And people speak very fondly. Also in Mazu, people speak very fondly about mainland China, its investment opportunities, and mainly economic. And the things that are really similar with North Korea are all of that, the physical, not necessarily the political side of things, but the physical aspects of it, the propaganda, the barbed wire, just these aspects of physical separation. And even though it's not alive today in Taiwan as it is in North Korea and South Korea, it's much more alive there now than it is in Taiwan. You still have that relic left over, and it really, like, so many similarities. I'd love to do some kind of study on that, but just these physical reminders of this very real separation.
Mm-hmm. Now, to wrap things up, here are some questions from viewers. Besides you, are there, or I guess in this case, were there other foreign expats working in the DPRK or North Korea? And what's the requirement like to get employed as a foreigner there?
It's funny, so many people ask me this, and it's like, firstly, I have to say, I'm not employed in North Korea. I'm not employed by any North Korean authorities. I'm not working for the North Korean state. I work for a Western tour company. And the requirements are, what would you want from a tour leader, from a tour guide? You have to be confident and friendly and like people and knowledgeable and open-minded, stuff like that. You don't need a university degree. Well, you do actually to have a visa for China, but like a work visa for China. But you just need to have an open mind, I think, and be willing to learn. So there's no necessarily thing that you need to have on your CV for it. What was your other question? Was that it?
Oh, it was that was basically it. I think for the person who asked this question though, to get an idea of what it's like to actually work in North Korea. Oh.
No, you just said were there any other expats? So I'll just say yes, there's a limited number of other expats that work in North Korea, and I would say we all know each other. Even if we don't all love each other, we definitely all know each other.
But to know what it's like to actually work in North Korea and be employed over there, there's a book I recommend by Felix Abt called A Capitalist in North Korea, because he's actually worked there for quite a few years for I believe, Swedish company. Basically, if you want to be employed by North Korea, you have to have skills that they need.
How interesting.
Yeah, you can't just be they don't need, for example, restaurant servers. You can't go there and work at a restaurant server. Now, if you're an engineer and you have skills they need, then they'll want your expertise, then they'll employ you. So it's they're very particular about the talents they need, especially they're a sanctioned country with limited resources.
Yeah. Why would they, you need to benefit North Korea in order for them to want to hire you. Or when a lot of people ask me oh, can I go and study at a university? How do I go and live there? And I'm like, you need to have something that they want. They're not going to risk having a foreigner in their country unless you prove yourself. You need to prove yourself to them.
And just liking them isn't enough because they have 25 million people who are more or less loyal to them. They don't need another one.
Yeah, and they're obviously not desperate for the foreigner propaganda thing because you remember, was he called Travis King, the American that ran over from the South Korean border to the North Korean border, the DMZ?
The most recent one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because he was escaping the authorities and he was escaping punishment from America.
Yeah.
They don't want those types of people
Yeah, he
going over
was.
there.
Yeah, but also they could have used him for soft propaganda. They could have used him if they wanted to, but they didn't. So they obviously are not short of, like you said, they're not short of people, loving the country and wanting to show that. So yeah.
I also think they realize it's a bad look that this guy went to jail in South Korea for, I think, physically assaulting a South Korean citizen, and he was about to be sent back to America for further punitive measures. Yeah, well, it wouldn't look good for them, to South Koreans, if they're like, oh yeah, this guy beat up one of our compatriots, but we're going to use him for our political means. Like, no, they're not stupid. I think the next question is pretty interesting, actually. Are the food and basic life needs strictly controlled and distributed by the state in North Korea, like what China did before 1978? And if that's the case, as a foreigner, do you have to comply with the ration system? And what are no to the ration system?
Yeah. And no to anything like that. So in North Korea, it's very much like North Korea and North Koreans, and then foreigners. Foreigners don't get any rations. Foreigners don't get free housing. Foreigners don't get any of that. North Koreans are North Koreans. They're I'm not saying that they're very similar to South Korea in that respect, in that they are we are we and you are you, And the difference in North Korea is obviously a lot bigger though, because in North Korea you get a lot from the state, whereas a foreigner, yeah, you really don't get that. Yeah.
From my understanding, the food and basic life needs, it's not strictly controlled per se. There are certain guarantees. You get rations, and I think male workers even have beer rations, if I'm correct.
Yes. Yep. Beer rations, which you can trade in for at specific places that you could also buy beer at as well.
Yeah. And it's like if you want to go beyond the rations, that's when your money becomes a little bit more useful, provided they have what you're looking for specifically. And what are economic activities like in the service sector? Do small businesses exist, and are there privately owned barbershops or independent shoemakers, tailors, etc.?
As far as I'm aware, there's no privately owned enterprise in North Korea, but I might be wrong there, but that is just my presumption because everything is owned by the state in North Korea. However, there are foreign joint-owned businesses and stuff like that. There's a Singaporean burger chain, which, we refer to as the McDonald's in North Korea. But all of these foreign enterprises and, these ventures, they don't really last. There was the Egyptian company that took over the telecoms, and I think that they're gone now. They also had a part in building the Ryugyong, the big pyramid hotel, and I just think it's not very economically. What's the word? You don't get a lot of money from doing it. I don't really understand why a lot of businesses would try and do it anymore, to be honest. Yeah.
You have to go in at the right time, right? Right before the opening up, and people just keep on betting on that, but they bet wrong.
Yes. For example, yes, exactly. Yes. No, for sure. I'm talking right now, I don't think that it's that it would be the right time. For sure, before I can see why people would want to do it. And also I see the benefits in it, both ways. Things out both ways. Yeah.
Now, the next question is from one of my audience members is, I visited the mainland and was impressed, but I've never been to Taiwan. The perception in the West is that life for the average person in Taiwan is far better than the mainland. What are the realities of economic life and consumer choices in Taiwan compared to the major centers on the mainland?
It's really funny because I think what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of Taiwanese go from Taiwan to work in China because the economic benefits in mainland China are way greater than being in Taiwan. The pay is a lot higher in mainland China. There's a lot more opportunities. I will say that this is generally before COVID. And I think I'm speaking generally, the economy is not doing as well in China now. And also I was saying before about the security risk, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, before a lot of people from Taiwan would go to mainland China to earn money. It's doing better economically. So I think whilst the West looks towards Taiwan and is like, wow, Taiwan's amazing, I do think that a big part of that has to do with this pro-Taiwan means anti-China rhetoric. And Taiwan is great, in its own way. But at the same time, it's not, it's not somewhere you'd want to come to make money. It's not, to be honest, somewhere you'd come to university because the education system is not that great. And, I realize that now that I'm here. So I realize how bad that sounds. But yeah, it's got some beautiful mountains. It's beautiful scenery, but at the same time, I think a lot of people don't realize that it's very similar to Southeast Asia as well, in terms of its economy and in terms of especially rural Taiwan. It's quite poor. It's not built up nicely, and it was built largely in a hurry. Most of the buildings and infrastructure that you see in Taiwan now was built very badly. Doesn't make any sense because a lot of it was built in a hurry because they never intended on staying here for a long time. And so I think it makes everything a little bit ugly, a little bit inconvenient, in a lot of the big cities at least.
And next one, second to last question. Did you know I'm a Taiwanese military intelligence asset?
I did not know that, I did not. I thought that you were a spy for some other government, so there we go.
Because some people online have made up that claim about me because I made an announcement in 2022 that I'd be coming back here to do my conscription. And they're like, oh, why are you voluntarily signing up for this reactionary military and becoming a GI Joe for the U.S. imperialists? And of course, it's not mainland Chinese people saying this because they understand that there's conscription here. It's these Westerners who don't know anything about China but say they're pro-China, but they're pro this imagined version of China, just like the way a lot of anti-China people are anti this imagined version of China that doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, and I have to say I sympathize with you there because it's currently going around on Japanese big media, actually, like the big main TV programs, that I am a spy who works for the North Korean government. So annoyingly enough, I did like this one interview for a Japanese TV news station, and they basically literally they twisted my words so badly that the journalist messaged me on Instagram and apologized for it. She literally was like, I'm sorry how our TV station twisted your words. That's not how I wanted it to sound. So that's how badly they twisted it. But anyway, they literally said on it that I get money from the North Korean government. And I was like, that's literally not true. So another Japanese TV station reached out and they were like, hey, we want to do an interview, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's fine. But can you give me the opportunity to correct this misinformation that's out about me? And obviously this backfired again. And now it's just out that I work for the North Korean government. Like all my Japanese friends are texting me like, you're famous in Japan. And I'm like, that's great for all the wrong reasons.
I think it's hilarious if you understand how North Korea works because usually they don't like working with foreigners unless foreigners can bring them money. They're not trying to work with foreigners to give them money.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh dear. At least if I was a spy, I'd be getting money for the past few years.
It's funny because you have people saying I'm Taiwanese military intelligence. You also have people saying I work for the CPC. I'm this sort of weird double agent, also CIA.
Yeah, I get that as well, CIA.
My question is this. If I'm Taiwanese military intelligence, why was my service, which wasn't even military service, in the fire services in the middle of nowhere in central Taiwan?
Yeah.
And when I have infiltrated the PLA or something like that, like what
Yeah.
access to information do I have in a government agency in central Taiwan that the government here doesn't already know is what I want to know.
But people don't want to know this. It's not sexy if like you explain it and everything. It's sexy in the media titles that says like, "Oh my gosh, Taiwanese military spy." You
Right.
know? So, never mind.
Finally, between the places that you lived in on both sides of the strait, Yangshuo, Beijing, and Tainan, what has been your favorite town or city to live in?
Beijing. I love it. Beijing hands down. And again, when I went back in March last year, I was worried that I would not like Beijing because my life has changed. My friends have gone. I was worried that, and I loved Beijing. I was in love with the life that I had, not with the actual city. But I went back, and I love Beijing. I do. There's so much history, so much culture. I love Beijing. There's so much food, so much going on. Big open spaces. That's what I can't deal with in Taiwan. Is everything is small and condensed, and there's so many people. And people are like, "How can you deal with being in Beijing if you don't like a lot of people?" And I'm like, you don't feel it. The streets are massive. It's so friendly to live there. Like there are so many big parks. Oh, yeah, I love it. So, yeah.
So I think this concludes our discussion today. It actually went a little bit longer than I expected. Hopefully you had fun.
We always talk too much, yeah. You can never shut us up.
Is there anything you want to plug or comment on?
I will comment on the fact that, as you mentioned before, I don't usually talk politics publicly, and this is probably the most publicly political I've been. So I'm a little nervous about that, but I hope that it didn't come across too much that I hate or love either side too much. Usually when I talk about Taiwan and Beijing, Taiwan and China, I'm not talking about the politics. I'm talking about the people and the culture and stuff like that. So I hope people can kind of see that. And yeah, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Zoe Discovers NK or at Zoe Discovers, either international stuff or North Korea stuff. And look out for the podcast, Discover North Korea. There's going to be new episodes from this month, from April. So yeah, listen out for that, and you can hear about my trip to Chiangbai-shan.
Can I ask you a question about your YouTube channel?
Of course, please. Oh yeah, people go to YouTube as well. But yeah, go on.
When's our video coming out?
Oh, okay. You know what? That'll be like my new thing that I'm doing. My YouTube, I have not, obviously you've seen, I haven't uploaded anything on there for a long time, but we do have an awesome cold noodle video in the back that I started editing and then it deleted itself. And since then I have been so frustrated to go back to it. But you know what? Okay, I'll do that.
We can refilm it now that I've started working out and am not as fat anymore.
Maybe that can be the second episode. We'll do another episode of North Korean cooking.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on my show. And you're welcome back at any time if there's anything you ever want to relay to my audience. And I wish you great success in your podcast, your studies here, and wish you a very awesome trip to the mainland Saturday. Wow, how long are you going to be there?
Just for a week.
Only for a week?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm leaving on April 30th.
Oh, yeah, we literally just miss each other by a week or so. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, I'm going to be there for maybe a month.
Yeah, head up to Chiangbai-shan if you can.
I'm thinking about it really. Because I'll be in Shenyang to visit family there, and that's just around the corner.
Oh, well, you definitely at least need to go to Dandong, go to the border or something like that. It's not that far away.
I probably shouldn't I?
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking about it, but now that you mention it, I'm like, yeah, I can buy North Korean soju and cigarettes.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's probably a little harder now than it used to be, but yeah, see what you find.
Maybe.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
If North Korea tourism resumes sooner rather than later, and you haven't moved on with your life, maybe one day we'll be recording an episode or two in Pyongyang.
That would be great. Yeah, let's wait for the day.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, thanks for coming on, and yeah, it was a good talk.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So that concludes our conversation with Zoe. I hope you found it engaging and informative. To hear more talks like the one we just had, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you receive your podcasts, and also on YouTube and Rumble. If you have any feedback or show suggestions that fit the theme of this podcast, please send them to straighttalk@xiangyu.tw. I'd now like to give a shout out to my upper level patrons, Alvin, Megapatriot, Yijing, and Pranav. Finally, if you like what I'm doing and want to support my work sharing a perspective on Taiwan and beyond not covered by mainstream media, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon or making a one-time donation to any of the links in the show notes. See you guys in the next episode.
讲，还是人情。